I just had a chat with Devaraj Sandberg this morning, and I thought I'd give him a little introduction to give some context. So, Devaraj is the founder of the School of Body Based Therapy, and he also has a YouTube channel which is particularly focused on one form of body based therapy that I'm very passionate about, which is called bioenergetics. Bioenergetics is basically a combination of three elements. So one is you will be holding on specific stretches or poses for a long time, kind of like you would in some forms of yoga, and you breathe very deeply. Some would say breathe into your balls if you're a man. I don't know if anyone has ever said breathe into your labia, but if not, I'm the first who said it. That's how deep you should breathe for this, and really feel what's going on in your body. And the third element is emotional expression. So the way this form of therapy works, there's this idea that when we suppress our emotions, which we do all the time, especially if we've been through traumatic experiences or any kind, or if we keep ourselves silent because of social pressure, those emotions actually remain in our body, and we create a kind of muscular tension to stop them from surfacing. And over time, this can create chronic holding patterns, also called neurotic holding patterns by some people. So our body posture shapes around the emotions that we suppress, which is also why you can sometimes see so much about a person's personality from looking at their posture. Now, what bioenergetics does is it breaks up these holding patterns and it frees, let's say, liberates the trapped emotions through expression, through shaking, and through loosening up the muscles that are working really hard to keeping them trapped. This has been a life-changing practice for me. Specifically, it has changed the way that I relate to others because my own emotions are no longer in the way as much. So because of that, I really think this is something that can help you connect deeper with yourself, deeper with others. And in my opinion, Devaraj is really the go-to guy to learn anything about this topic and other body-based therapies.
Cool, thank you.
Yeah, I invited you because I would love to hear a lot about bioenergetics and your journey. I had found your YouTube channel,
Hmm.
um, and I was amazed by it because it has quite a humble vibe to it. Like it's not over promoting itself, but it's full of this knowledge on the topic of bioenergetics that it has such a depth of information which I hadn't encountered anywhere else. Now I haven't been to any schools or even found any schools about it, and then just discovered that you are doing something like that online, right? Like a bioenergetics school for I think both people that want to practice it at home, but also for facilitators.
Yeah, I mean, in December 2019, I started because I'd had the channel running a few years on YouTube, and people were asking me for like a course and deeper content, something they could follow, systematic and structured. So I created this course called Bioenergetics for Journey, which is a very intense sort of 52-week process, which many people will probably take more like 2 years to complete. And then because some people were still up for it and wanted to become facilitators, I added like a part two to that, which meant you'd have to complete the 52 weeks, which is no small task. And then it's like a 6-month course with a lot more theoretical content about holding space and about clinical issues and about facilitation, picked up from my sort of 20 years in the field. And you also have to, in that section, like every 2 weeks, we have a little meeting with people who are on that training and they lead something online. There are different parts of the world, but they lead something online and everybody else joins in with it, in the group. And then myself and others give a bit of feedback gently so the person can pull themselves up to a basic standard. And I was a bit skeptical if you could really do something like this online. And
Right.
it was just kind of experimental for me, but and it hasn't been running so long, but the two people who've graduated and another one person who's about to graduate are all now starting to run their own things, either physically or online. So and they're much transformed from when they started with part two. So I'm pretty happy with it so far, really. It's like
Yeah, I love in your story how this just organically came to be. Like people would
yeah,
ask you for the next thing that didn't
yeah.
exist yet, and then it would grow there. Um, what kind of issues do people come to you with when they want to start the journey of the like that intensive bioenergetics course, and how does it help them?
Well, I mean, the thing is with I mean, generally, I've got people who come to me to want to do the journey. I've got people who want to come and do sessions, and some who want to come and do workshops, more like in-person workshops. I think the background issue for a lot of people is they're aware that they're quite dissociated from the body, that they're kind of spending a lot of time thinking, and when their workday is over, they can't easily kind of come back down. Their mind is still going super busy and wanting to do more things. And they may also, have difficulty accessing their feelings, accessing their heart, this kind of thing. They've become a bit too mechanical. That's something that I hear in slightly different words from people all around the world. Another big thing is that's kind of like the leaving pattern in Reichian character structure. Another big one is this kind of mother wound that makes men in particular extremely needy, and young men struggle with neediness because it's obviously not perceived, particularly by young women, as a positive quality, quite the opposite. And so that's more like the oral type, people come busy with that. Some people come busy with the endurer type, where it's constantly staying small, constantly staying safe, always being kind of afraid to step up. So those are three kind of classic kind of ways that people come in different shape or form. They may not be aware of right characters.
Yeah, I was just wondering, the
Approach
things that
and
you mention are you need to have like a quite a level of self-awareness to know that this is what you would like to work on. In general, do people realize that, or do they come with a different issue than they believe they have, and then they discover, oh, it's that I need to connect more to my body, it's that I have this mother wound.
well, I mean, it's I'm using those terms as a Reichian therapist, that kind of thing. But for sure, people come expressing things in their own language, in their own way, and then you kind of discuss with them, and you kind of, okay, so it's more like this, or when this situation this happens, or you feel super needy, or you're really struggling to just maintain any kind of a course. You have really good ideas, but you can't seem to manifest them. These are all kind of symptoms of certain kinds of egoic wounds from character structure. And then my job is more to kind of see what's practical for this person to move forwards.
Yeah.
But regard to the journey, and online courses, they're useful and good, but also you do need a certain level of basic discipline, or at least the capacity to reach out when you're struggling, and that is also challenging for people.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I've had times when, well, especially before your videos, I had read a book from Alexander Lowen with all these exercises, and when you said I think you said mechanical was the word you used, and that's exactly how I would do them. Like I would read how to do the exercise and do it, but it didn't do much for me besides improve my posture, and that's actually also how I got there. And for a while I was just satisfied with that, but when I started following along the videos where you really speak about like, hey, if you feel like you're struggling, you have to pay more awareness, you have to breathe deeper, you have to really be in your body. That's when I actually started seeing um, changes, and I didn't come to the exercises for these emotional changes, but they really did. And the thing that was the biggest surprising impact for me was in all my relationships, and maybe not so much an outward change, but in the past, like certain things that my girlfriend would say or a coworker would say, they could make me feel angry or needy or sad. And I started realizing that later these same things would happen. They would say the exact same things, but I wouldn't get those feelings welling up. And I think, but maybe you would know more about this, that it is that these feelings were indeed like trapped in places in my body and not expressing them. Like every time something triggered it, it was like waiting for the chance to finally get out there, and having that space in the bioenergetics practice to actually get those feelings out. Then now they were liberated, so I don't walk around with them anymore. Well, there are still plenty of things, but these specific. So it doesn't happen that those feelings need to be, those old feelings need to be expressed in similar situations. And I found that amazing because it really made me relate more honestly, because I could now listen to what the other person was saying instead of being, let's say, obsessed with the feeling that I was having in that moment, which I didn't even know was unrelated to what was happening. And I just, yeah, it was after only 2 or 3 months of daily practice I started to see this change. I found it. I've done plenty of talking therapy, but I think this impact is just way bigger. It really surprised me.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, in the West in particular, it's all about the mind, not just in terms of like therapy. It's like it's a world of the mind. It's the world of the mind, the world of thinking and thinking and thinking about everything. And it's like, it's been very useful. And, we've developed amazing technology and all of this stuff, but, it doesn't really make us very good human beings. It doesn't really help us to be present or aware, particularly as we've already got parts of our brain which are suppressing and repressing stuff from early childhood. And then that, creates a kind of person who is like, we have this default perspective of like judging the outside world, or making people wrong who are on some level we're not even really aware of, just triggering an emotional response in us, which we've rejected, and so then people go in these kind of, social media silos where they're all complaining about a certain type of person or whatever, and it's like, it's a collective opportunity to kind of avoid the wound that's going on inside underneath, and that's not to demean the value of changing the world and stuff like that. But if it's just coming out of self-avoidance, then I don't think it's going to really last or go anywhere particularly good. Our culture has to somewhere come back to really wanting to be present with ourselves and go on like an inner journey, to find authenticity. But what you're saying is really accurate, but you could stick with a process for 2 months is good, just from following a YouTube channel, because as some of that charge from the past comes out, then when someone is triggering us in some way, it's like there's less energy that's being triggered, and we don't need to go into a kind of evasive reaction, avoidant action. That's what kind of happens. And so it's like, I'm being triggered, but it's nowhere near. Whereas before, we'd like either get the fuck out of there, or push back against what they're saying, or just go in a mode of the brain where we just shut them off and don't bother listening to them anyway. Instead of using one of those escapes, it's like, okay, that starts to come on, but there's more like, oh, I don't have to do that. I'm kind of more aware of my escaping strategies, and I've got more choice. Because the charge of energy that was held in the body has been dissipated,
Now I'm curious, because I remember I did feel in the first weeks that I would get triggered more easily. Is that's part of the process that you go through, or is it coincidence?
It's like, it depends on the person, but yeah, for sure. If you're like suppressing, I mean, mostly when people say triggering, mostly they're talking about anger. Sometimes it's about emotional pain as well.
Yeah, anger and shame was it for me. Those two were the big ones that came up a lot.
Yeah, because, it's complex, and I don't think anyone really understands it. But energy and emotion are kind of entangled together inside the human unconscious psyche, but we don't fully understand it. And what bioenergetics does is more take some of the energy and the suppression out of the muscles, and then the emotional reactions can come on much quicker. Whereas before, perhaps something wouldn't really trigger us, or we just have a little defense. Now it's like there's a fire of rage coming up inside, and like fuck you, and this kind of thing, and we have to manage that. We have to learn to manage that because we're starting to take the lid off something. Humans we suppress a lot by nature. It's kind of, when you start to see it inside your own psyche, it's like really something. How much we suppress, and it does take a while for enough energy to come out, but we haven't got that strong reactivity, and it does vary from person to person. Some people get it much more strongly.
When you say we suppress by nature, do you mean that this is not necessarily a symptom of living in a society that is so mind focused, but it is just the same in any, let's say, a tribe living in nature uncontacted? Like they would still be suppressing similar things to function in the group?
Yeah, I would say that's likely. I mean, it can take a little bit of it can look a little bit different or something like that. But, most of the problems seem to be coming. I don't know. I don't know if anyone's ever really researched any of this stuff like scientifically, but what makes us human is like these big frontal lobes up here, that we've got that like our primate ancestors don't have, basically. And this big prefrontal cortex, which can make like an avatar of who we are, but we can project into the world. Nowadays, we project it onto social media. We create a personality on social media that may or may not be accurate with our real self if you meet us. But even before this, this gave us a capacity to create like a persona, something to push out into the world, to meet people with this kind of idealized version of me that we felt would get our needs met. And in order to do this, this ability kind of comes on maybe at the age of, I don't know, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or puberty 13, something like that, and we become very obsessed with how people see us. In order to do that, it represses. And you're probably going to find, if you go to like some really supposedly like primitive community somewhere in some remote part of Asia, people have still got a lot of the same. It's like the problems are kind of inherent with the way the frontal lobes are developed. The human brain has bugs. It has bugs, and we don't really have anyone to go in there and sort it out. It's just kind of how it is. And another feature a bit is that modern Westerners tend to fantasize about there being some really kind of primitive way of life out there that's just better than they are.
Yeah, I definitely have that.
But then if you go to these countries, you don't really find it like that. It's kind of a weird inverse arrogance sometimes or whatever, I don't know. In my travels, I don't find it like that. Yeah, in Africa, sometimes people are just much more natural and happy and much more fiery and volatile as well in some places, but like there's some level of truth in it, but it's like, I think there's a lot of mythologizing in the Western psyche about it as well.
Yeah, it's like the grass being greener on the other side. Just
yeah.
But it is kind of comforting. The idea that this is just human, like everyone goes through this. It also, like, you don't need to put pressure on yourself to fix all that, because it's just a thing that is there. It's part of being human. That's nice to know.
Yes. Of course, it could go badly wrong. I mean, we're seeing as a culture, that people become more obsessed with their online presence than who they are as a person when you meet them physically, and that that could lead to some pretty crazy shit down the line somewhere. I think we're just starting taking footsteps into that kind of realm.
Yeah, it's weird to see. I once met to like a few influencers, the people that really lived for that was all they did, just like sell their image and make money off it. And hanging out with them was a really weird experience, because they lost the ability to relate to other people, including each other, because the times that they would ask each other's questions, it was almost like to get that scoop on the other person and like, oh, I can publish this private information before they do it themselves. Because that will get me more likes or something. It was really weird. Yeah. Or like they would ask a question to me and then turn away, because what mattered was that I heard them ask the question, not that they would actually get an answer and yeah, get to know another person. I mean, I don't know if this is the case for everybody, but I remember that I don't really use social media. I have it like out there somewhere, but I don't really check it. And I had lost touch with what was going on, like for young people there. I was very surprised by it. I got curious about something else when you were saying like that natural suppression that is just going on for us. One thing that I noticed is that and I'm still working on it actually, I haven't released much of it. I suppress a lot of positive feelings, like a lot of joy, a lot of random laughter, and it's come out here and there in exercises. And it fascinates me that why would we suppress these desirable emotions? Maybe even for me, they're deeper than the anger was or the sadness was. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this process of suppression or repression, is not really something we're mediating consciously. It's not really like, okay, I just really need to push this shit down. I mean, maybe sometimes it feels a bit like that, like you're just about to go on some big date, or you have to talk in front of a load of people and you're feeling a bit crap and you think, I just need to just have some coffee or whatever and just get myself in the right space. But as a general rule, it's not being consciously mediated. So the part of the brain in the brain's defenses, which is pushing and holding stuff down, in order to hold stuff down, it can't be selective. So it just has to push everything down. So like 30, 40 years ago, they used to have a thing called pleasure limit, but many people, it's like a psychological term or a bit on the periphery in the Reichian school, that you could see that people, particularly around sex, had a very small pleasure limit. The amount of pleasure that they could really allow themselves to experience was small. Whereas if you ask someone about pleasure, they're going to say, "Oh yeah, I just want more and more pleasure. Give it to me." But in reality, when we shut down pleasure very quickly, when it's like, because it also brings on feelings of losing control, not knowing what's going on, being subsumed almost by a bigger force somehow, and not having that kind of egoic control. So it's kind of inevitable, that if there is this suppression of feeling and energy going on, that also affects how much pleasure we can have. It's not, it isn't selective. It can't select for one and not the other. I tend to think that it's more energy that's being suppressed, and that can take different emotional kind of flavors. I don't know the exact relationship, right. Like that. Yeah. If we're not accessing so much of our emotional pain or woundedness, we kind of inevitably don't access so much of our pleasure and love,
Right, because we suppress everything at once. You were speaking about like the direction that society is going into with the persona being now almost an external thing on the internet. Does that also go along with a stronger suppression of emotions, or are they unrelated?
Well, there is a basic strategy. One of the basic strategies talking about like dissociation or the leading pattern to keep emotions down or under control is to spend much more time just thinking about everything. So generally, when we're spending a lot of time on social media, it's very thought-based. Emotions might be being triggered, and stuff like that, but we're kind of staying in this thought world. And when something's triggering us, it's like there's two kind of choices. We can either go into the heart and feel what's going on, or we kind of go into the mind and push back, and And that's mostly what I see in our culture is people just go into the mind and push back, but they're not aware of that. So during like the COVID times when a lot of people are in lockdown and measures, and they're spending even more time on the phone or more time, on social media, there's more dissociation, and they're more out of their body. They're less in touch with with the feelings, just with the raw sense of a body. They're less. And so it is getting worse, in my opinion. And furthermore, there's probably certainly negative mental health things which accrue from that, and quite possibly negative like physical health, just regular health things which are accruing from that. It's like a huge thing that I see going on in the back of society, it's particularly Western society, that like no one is speaking about. You can go and read a lot of stuff about culture war, either for culture war and the rights of various people or whatever, or against culture war or whatever. But to me, a lot of what's going on in society, especially online, is really to do with dissociation from the body. That's all it's really to do with. That's the grand cause underneath it all. But no one's really got around to speaking about that yet. It's not really recognized. We just see people as being like certain gender or ethnic groups as just being massively enraged, and hammering out loads of don't do this and using all sorts of manipulative techniques.
This is one thing that it really, I would love to dig deeper into it, and because now what you're saying, I can relate to it a lot. So something that I would love to contribute to healing in the world is this, I would call it more like a dissociation from the connection with each other, like men and women starting to relate to each other, at least publicly, so on social media, as oppressors and victims, instead of thinking like, oh, we have our differences, and that's actually the strength, how can we connect with each other and make a world that is just where both of us really shine. And the same happens indeed between races, or between even political leanings, that people are starting to grow further and further apart, and it doesn't seem like the aim of the conversation is to consolidate with each other anymore, or to find healing. It seems like it's just like pointing fingers at each other, and you have to change, and I that worries me a bit. And now what you say about dissociating from the body, it makes a lot of sense, because if you're not feeling that there is this rage going on inside of you, or this unresolved trauma, and you are really in your mind, and you're looking for somebody to blame, and if you can blame an entire group of people, like let's say men, then it's easier to believe that story, because an entire group is so strong compared to what you are feeling. And I've definitely been there as a teenager, that I would point at authority figures or at culture in general, and think that they had wronged me, but it was just unresolved trauma, and I never felt my body, so I didn't know that there were things inside me that needed fixing. And then I read this sentence somewhere, and I don't know why it got to me. It said, if you think that there's something wrong with like the entire world but you, then what's more likely, that every person is doing something wrong except you, or that there's something about your behavior that makes you feel that way? And that really was like a slap in the face. That we wake up, you need to change yourself. You need to change how you relate to those people, not. And I would love to find a way to bring more of that, to bring more introspection and connection. But it seems to be like the gap is getting wider and wider. It seems like indeed this urgent thing that is not really talked about often, because it's also a touchy subject, right? To get into that victim and oppressor story and say something else.
Yeah. I mean, it totally is. There's more polarization going on in the world, but there's another aspect to it as well. For me, which is like, sometimes the world seems to just go into this more dialectical state where it's just a fucking great fight going on, you know, like, and maybe that's part of it, part of how change happens as well, you know, sometimes. So, you know, it's not necessarily the case, I don't think, that you know, in an ideal world, things just get healed. You know, the feminist can find the common ground with the kind of raging, kind of masculine, you know, unconscious male, or some agreement can happen and it looks beautiful and we feel good. But you know, our culture is also dynamic and changing. You know, it's a facet of human life that we don't know what the future fucking looks like. And most attempts to create a controlled future, such as like communist societies, have, whatever you think about them, good or bad, is historically they have failed. And that humans have kind of pumped for the one that, even though it's more fucked up on the surface, offers some level of kind of like a future which is uncertain, which allows the possibility of something change and maybe more exciting happening than just the same old party just telling you what to do forever, you know, and you're just kind of finding your girlfriend or husband and having your kids and living in your little flat, and it just goes round like that forever with no other development. You know, it's like we try and map out a future, each of us, that we think is good, but it may not work like that, and who knows really what the fuck's happening underneath anyway. You know, it's like, so, you know, these culture wars that are going on aren't necessarily, and the polarization isn't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, it's a drag when we spend all day fucking angry about something we've read on the internet, or someone we know is like that, or some friend of ours now doesn't speak to us because we don't agree with some position they took and we both think we're right and they're not. You know, it's a drag on a personal level, but I mean, who the fuck knows at the end of the day also?
Right.
You know, no one really knows.
So, if I understand this correctly, you're kind of likening it to just being just like a breath cycle. It's like a cycle of order and chaos, and this is just like creating the next fertile soil for whatever order emerges out of it, which we don't know yet.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's
this is the thing, you know. I mean, it's like, this is the thing. We don't fucking know, you know. It's like, and there's fear around that, you know, because we want to understand. You know, I spent several months really getting hard into geopolitics, like earlier this year and a bit of last year, because I wanted to understand what the fuck was going on, you know, at least try, because my mind was afraid. My mind was afraid of what's going on, or where's all this shit going to. So in order to create some level of reassurance, I just had to go and study all sorts of historians and kind of geopolitical analysts and stuff like that, until I came to a point where it was more like, okay, I've got a kind of handle on what's happening. It's not just random, you know. And maybe if I was a more enlightened being, I wouldn't have to do that and I could just be with it. But I think all we can really ever do is just, hey, what is my truth in this moment, in this situation, and how do I express that, you know? And that's kind of all we can do, you know.
Well, I think you said something really nice about diving into that topic because you were afraid and understanding it. It's something that I've done throughout my life, especially when I was more dissociated from my body, as a survival strategy. Whenever I didn't understand something, I would just try to go really deep in it, get a level of understanding, and that would give me acceptance, and then I would relax again. And I think that really has its place, and I see that you're doing it too. So I wonder how you kind of integrate that with not getting too much into your mind, like still staying aware of what's going on, but also using the power of the mind as it is useful in many instances.
Well, I guess how I experience it for me is more like a kind of fascination with a topic for a while or something like that. And then I think, you know, why am I commenting about this, or why am I busy with this? And then I just end up kind of trying to learn or understand something about it. So, you know, whilst on one level, I guess I have an idealized version where like I'm just totally not busy with any of these kind of things, and my mind is just like in some kind of nirvana, no mind kind of state, you know. Also, that's not my reality, you know, and at times I'm really motivated to just understand things, and so I just have to accept that about myself, you know, and you know, ideally not invest in some beating myself up about it or something, but just what I like is that every now and again I get really into something, maybe it's political or whatever, and I kind of study it for a while, and then it just kind of gets let go of. You know, I don't. I find like if I listen to someone speaking about a topic, you know, they can quite easily convince me of something, and then you know maybe I listen to someone else and they can quite easily convince me of something completely different. You know, I don't seem to have super stable opinions about the world outside, like that I struggle to keep them really firm, you know. And I don't totally know if that's a good or bad thing, but you know, it is how I am at the moment anyway, you know.
Well, it has pros and cons. I mean, the good thing is that you won't become dogmatic or permanently brainwashed by accident. And I think the downside would be that you maybe would get temporarily brainwashed more quickly if someone would really have that intention.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think the world right now is full of people trying to get you to believe in something harmful. I mean, they're out there, but I wouldn't worry about that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's it, you know. That is one of the things, isn't it? You know, because like the problem of the evil, you know, or this kind of thing, you know. And my experience has been that, you know, this idea of real malign intent is only coming out of unconsciousness anyway, you know. It's like in certain childhoods or psychological orientation, someone can get pleasure out of creating pain in someone else, you know, but it's also kind of coming out of unconsciousness in a way. It's not really that's who they are. It's just that there's a part of a puzzle that they haven't unraveled. And in order to kind of feed themselves with their dopamine system, they get off on kind of attacking people either online or even physically or whatever. You know, it's like, well, I don't really believe that there's an absolute kind of evil out there. You know.
And as a therapist, have you met people that in the past behaved like that and suddenly reached a point where they start to become reflective and said, "Oh, I need to heal this inside of me"?
Sure. I mean, guys who've been in prison, you know, and I've been in trouble with the law myself when I was younger, you know, often get to that. Men with a history of violence, getting older, you know, can just, what happened as they were young in their teenage years is like often that from some kind of trigger, you know, someone that they perceive not showing them respect in some way, you know, they just go straight into violence, you know. And then at some point as you get older, some of that egoic power strength kind of diminishes from your mind, and you start to introspect on like, hey, maybe that guy wasn't trying to put me down, you know, maybe he just made some random comment and then I ended up like bashing him, and shit, that was bad, you know. And I think a lot of people start to unpick it, and even, you know, with violence, you know, you learning to communicate about feelings is very, very useful for people, you know. And actually to, you know, when working in American prisons, I haven't done that myself, but you know, you often hear about it. And like as a therapist, you know, there's all sorts of techniques and ways to start to disarm that kind of the tendency towards violence in men in particular. And in my own life, yeah, sure, I meet people who massively regret some of the stuff they've done. You know, people who've maybe, you know, nearly killed someone on drugs or something like that on the acid trip, you know. And it's, you know, and there's a kind of redemption, you know, in being able to come back and speak about feelings. And even if you can't make good what you did before, you know, you can kind of be in it in a way that it doesn't just prey on you, you know. Internally you can be honest about it, and honest about the feelings that you're carrying around inside from that, you know.
This is like your most examples you're giving are about men. Yeah, particularly the violence because we're just more prone to it. but I also get the impression, and I could be wrong about this because I don't know what it's like to be a woman, but that men carry this in general just a massive amount of suppressed pain, including men who are not violent at all. They're just like very chill, but often when I am alone with a man for the first time and like there's not the group around it, that kind of enforces us all to just like put on that persona to a degree, because I don't mean that we're acting fake, right? Then a lot of these things comes up and you learn things about what they've been through that I think we've never spoken about this to anybody. Do you know why that is? That it's so, or even, or you can tell me if I'm wrong about this. It's just the, the feeling that I have that is so common in among men, particularly.
Well, I don't know. I'm not a social anthropologist, but I guess it's just social conditioning, you know. I lived for a long time in an Osho community, like 17 years, and he was a spiritual teacher. But regardless what you think about Osho, all of his communities were matriarchies. The women had the power roles.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, as a guy coming into an environment like that, you're used to kind of competing to find your way to the top in some way if you're a bit alpha, you know, and taking out the other males in some form or other, or competing with them for the women that you consider to be the hottest and this kind of thing. But in a matriarchal structure, well, certainly the bit about getting power roles is not quite so easy, you know, because a lot of the power roles are already taken by women and it's just how it is. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like the men at first, you know, coming into that structure, it's kind of weird for them, you know. And it's true that not so many super masculine males come into a structure like that, but men, when you put them in a different environment, much more easily start, or they see males that they can look up to talking about their pain, being more emotional, allowing vulnerability, this kind of thing, talking about the bits of their sex life that aren't working, talking about stuff which normally down the pub with a bunch of guys, you would not go near those topics.
Right.
When they see that, they start to think, well, maybe I can do that as well, you know? So it's like, I think there's just a lot of social conditioning, and I guess it's probably coming from our hunter-gatherer past, or, you know, having to protect, having to defend. You know, if you're being attacked by another tribe, you know, you can't necessarily go into all the emotions, but like,
Yeah,
you
that's
know,
true.
that are being stirred up in you, or the feeling of pain or invasion. You know, you need to keep your weapons handy and protect the tribe. I don't know exactly, something like that for guys, you know. And but men, you know, quickly have access to these feelings, and in like manner, it's easy for men to develop the idea that women are much more in contact and completely comfortable with their feelings and with things like intimacy, whereas actually, you know, when you get in this field, you'll see that women are just as freaked out about this stuff as well. You know, a lot of women will say, hey, I want much more intimacy and connection in a sexual relationship with a man. But, you know, that's also an easy thing to say, and not always so easy to manifest, you know, or so easy to be true to. Women have just as many avoidance strategies around pain and anger or whatever as men do, in my
Yeah, and
experience.
they
You
also
know?
have a lot of pressure on them from society on all kinds of things. I can imagine that must be really hard to. Yeah, we all have our cross to carry as people and as gender, and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's like, you know, everyone is trying to kind of be someone they're not, you know, and that has a cost. And it's not totally bad. It can be a developmental challenge to occupy a certain space from your ideal of who you should be. But at the same time, you know, there's a cost to that as well, you know, in terms of the society we live in the moment.
Speaking of the Osho community, I before bioenergetics I did the dynamic meditation quite a bit, and I remember one of the first times I did it, I had kind of a in the part where it's pure emotional expression, I had kind of a regressive experience where it seemed that I went like backwards evolutionary, and I started to feel like smaller and then like a primate and an animal. It was just like a real, it messed up my mind, like what just happened. Um, but it came very naturally. And I've heard you speak in a video about the origins of bioenergetics being a bit shrouded in mystery. And I've started to see it like pop up. For example, my cat, if my cat had a fight and it comes back in, the first thing it does is like shake a bit, and then it just relaxes. And then I also noticed things like hakas, you know, the Maori dance. Like
Yeah.
they have similar stances and expressive elements that come up in these bioenergetic exercises. Do you think it's something that has just been with us, like that we know how to do, but don't because it's not a cultural tradition?
Yeah, I mean, my basic position with bioenergetics and is that the body can heal itself psychologically. It doesn't actually need very much input from the mind or thinking or self-image. It actually can heal itself. It can actually heal itself psychologically, make ourselves whole without the mind having to really be involved, you know. But you know, in reality, that's for some people that's just too much. Their mind wants control of the process, you know, and I can be like that at times as well, you know. I can't always just jump straight into a process that's happening spontaneously within me. Once the kind of monitoring part of the mind sees that you're moving to the edge of your behavioral boundaries, you know, it will start to freak out, you know, and be worried,
Yeah.
you're going to go mad, you're going to do this, whatever. So it will pull you back, you know. But nevertheless, it's basically a principle of my belief about these therapies that the body can heal itself. It doesn't actually need, the mind is more like this kind of meddling therapist, meddling, annoying therapist coming in, always trying to kind of categorize everything, always trying to understand everything you're going through. But the body is actually completely capable, especially the pelvic area, once it starts to move spontaneously, of completely liberating people. You know, it's absolutely capable of doing that. That's my belief based on my personal experience. But so yeah, we don't really need so much input from this thing, just to kind of remember the exercise and to stay in the position and breathe a certain way or whatever, you know, little tasks the mind has, and then you know, release will happen kind of naturally.
So our job is to get out of the way to
A little
let it
bit to
happen.
hold
Yeah.
space for ourselves in a way. Yeah.
When you say about the mind, like trying to control everything, one thing that happens a lot in these group dynamic meditations is that people tend to control the expression or even try to control the shaking. Um, is this something that helps? Like if you're in your mind that you say, well, I'm going to like fake it till you make it until your body starts doing it spontaneously?
Yeah, it's okay. You know, fake it till you make. I mean, in a kind of like theory of catharsis, which is not a subject that's much discussed in therapy, you know, it's like generally what you see is like your mind is driving you into a form of mechanical physical behavior for a while. Like in a tantrum, you're lying in a certain way, you're bashing down with your fists, you're kicking with your heels, you're moving your head and you're making sound. And so it's very mechanical to start with when you're pumping up the energy. And at some point, if you're lucky, because you can't really make this happen, a spontaneous process starts off within you and it starts to just do it itself. And it's like, whoa, what the fuck's this? You know,
Yeah.
it's just happening. Like what you shared just now about when you were doing dynamic, it's like you feel yourself kind of regressing in a certain way. I imagine that was like a spontaneous thing that started to kind of
Yeah.
happen inside of you, you know, and and you just allowed it to whatever degree you could.
Yeah, and I also couldn't understand it. So I just like I stopped being skeptical because I had no way of trying to understand it anyway, and I just let it happen. um, one thing I'm still very curious about, because we're starting to near the end of this conversation. Once I did, I've been singing for about 2 decades, and once I start practicing the bioenergetics, I at some point accidentally started applying like the breathing and feeling your body while singing, and then I start to feel the resonance of a certain note in my body, and later even a word. And I've had moments where singing as emotional expression, so like taking a song that resonates with a feeling that you have kind of pent up in your body, that singing those words at that pitch and focusing on that body part, it can actually release as well. And I started simultaneously going to weekly karaoke's, and I noticed that when I did that publicly, if I would pick a song that was like kind of painful for me to sing or listen to, and I did that publicly and I felt my body, that effect was just amplified. And indeed, like I would not be the person singing anymore. I would allow it to happen. And when I reached that, it would happen to other people that sang along as well. It's like a weird thing where the emotions are contagious and it gets liberated in different people. I found it an absolutely amazing experience. And I've also tried to replicate it, but I can't. Either it happens or it doesn't. So all I do is just sing more. I'm curious to dive deeper into this as a personal practice. And I wonder if you have any experience with it. Perhaps if it's just chanting or screaming, but if you know anything about what singing does on that bioenergetic level.
I don't know so much about singing, but I liked your idea where, maybe there's a song but doesn't fit in with your self-image and you just have to sing it in front of people or something like that, because then you have to own an aspect of your character that you're previously kind of keeping pushed away, whatever it is, singing a childlike song or a very heartful song when you're trying to be a macho kind of male, whatever, that's definitely have therapeutic value, no doubt about it, And I mean, when I'm doing sometimes I was working quite a lot with the belly, and getting more awareness and feeling in the belly and some kind of just making the deepest tone that you can make, can be very useful, and just spending time just feeling. Because we have these kind of somatic centers, and there's a crossover with Hindu spirituality and all sorts of kind of cosmic ideas. But even if you take that stuff out, there is a certain category of emotions that appear to be sourced in the belly, some in the center of the chest, like heart center, this kind of thing. And so we can feel into these areas of our body and make sound and just see what kind of happens, just see what kind of happens. It's and sure, having a group of people can amplify effects. People get swept up in the feeling that's being generated by one or more people, and carried along on an emotional journey with it as well.
Yeah, I definitely feel like that. Getting out of the way is much easier when you are in a group where everybody decides we're gonna just give each other permission to let go. The best parties are like that people stop being individuals and there's just a mood that happens, and we become almost like we're no longer independent actors. Whatever energy is going on is moving us, and it's beautiful. I think those are the best moments I have had in my life, where you're no longer yourself, you're part of something bigger that's happening, even when you can't explain it.
Yeah, because we do create a kind of an image of self in our mind, and then we give it attributes, and then we kind of imagine that it's instigating all sorts of stuff, and that is a bit of a kind of useful behavior for acquiring certain goals from evolution, like sex or food and stuff like that. But it's not necessarily so really true, but someone is kind of sitting behind our eyes looking out, it's just that's just a useful model, people who study the brain tell you this, there's no little guy sitting in our head looking out. So, this whole idea that we have this hard identity with these attributes and these political orientations or the kinds of music we like or don't like or whatever, it's kind of a little bit fake. There's no real subject of experience like that, it's just more like kind of signaling or learned behavior that we've got, that we put out, it's and of course, to someone who's really heavily into this kind of idea of a fixed self inside, then they almost certainly will simultaneously fantasize about letting go of that fixed self, because that's the flip side, just being swept away in a kind of moment of whatever, abandonment.
Yeah, I have that. I'm a very disciplined, structured person, and that's what I crave the most, like abandonment. Yeah, even though I could totally do that and whenever I want, but yeah, being so disciplined, I often override those desires in favor of consistency, and then I just have to, yeah, give myself the space to go free.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah. We're
it,
guys. Hey, we're guys. You know, we have that side.
it's been a pleasure to listen to you today, Devraj. It was really, yeah, awesome. I hope that that many other people get to listen to it as well. And the internet connection was kind to us, which
Yeah,
is also
mine was
nice.
cutting in and out a little bit, but I managed to kind of stay with you. What you were saying, I think, pretty good. And it's been lovely meeting you, man. Hey,
Likewise, yeah. And
thank you.
I would like to ask one more thing, and that's if anybody was listening to this and they're now very curious about just getting started with their own bioenergetic practice, what would be the place to start for them?
I mean, you can just stick my name, Deveraj Sandberg. It's kind of a weird name because it's half spiritual and half Swedish, and I'm not really either of those. But I mean, like but it is a weird name, and you can just stick it in Google, and you'll find my website and books, and you'll find my YouTube channel. You know, so there's a lot of free content that you can experiment with, and if you get turned onto it, you can look for buying a book or a course or doing a session, something like that. But certainly, if you put Deveraj Sandberg or Deveraj Bioenergetics into Google, you're going to find me pretty quick.
Okay, I will link to all of them in this video. Yeah, that's easier for anybody. And I wish you a beautiful day there in Georgia.
Thank you, Pep.
Bye.
Cheers, man.